When the German war machine swallowed Poland in September 1939, few could imagine that one man would willingly walk into the darkest place the Nazis would ever build. Witold Pilecki, cavalry officer, underground leader, and one of the most fearless individuals of World War II, watched his homeland collapse under the dual invasion of Germany and the Soviet Union. While others fled or hid, Pilecki formed a resistance network from the ashes, determined not only to fight the occupiers, but to understand their deepest secrets. Rumors of a new camp began to spread, a prison facility near the town of Auschwitz, where people vanished without explanation. No one knew what was happening inside, no one had escaped to tell the truth, and no intelligence network in Europe could penetrate it. So, on September 19, 1940, Pilecki did the unthinkable. He allowed himself to be captured during a street roundup in Warsaw so he could infiltrate Auschwitz from the inside. It wasn't suicide. It was strategy. His objective was clear: enter the camp, form a resistance movement among prisoners, document every crime committed behind the barbed wire, and smuggle the truth to the outside world. By doing so, he became the only man in Allied intelligence to volunteer to enter Auschwitz alive. When Pilecki stepped through the gates, greeted by the words "Arbeit macht frei," he realized instantly that no rumor had captured even a fraction of the horror that lived within the fences, surrounded by guards with dogs, beaten before he even reached the barracks, stripped of his name and reduced to prisoner 4859, he faced the same terror that swallowed every new arrival: starvation, cold, disease, and a level of brutality engineered to break the human spirit. But Pilecki had not come to die. Within days, he began secretly organizing fellow prisoners into units, building a clandestine network that stretched across work details, kitchens, storage rooms, and even sections of the camp where SS inspections were rare. He memorized numbers, smuggled reports in scraps of clothing, mapped the layout of newly built crematoria, and documented the early experiments in mass extermination that would later shock the entire world. Most astonishing of all, Pilecki sent the information out through coded messages hidden in smuggled laundry, bribed workers, and underground couriers who risked everything to deliver his warnings to the Polish resistance, and eventually to London. While the world still debated German propaganda, Pilecki was already shouting the truth from inside the furnace of Auschwitz, and he had only just begun his mission. The first weeks inside Auschwitz broke most men, but for Pilecki they became the foundation of something the Germans never imagined possible: a functioning underground army built in the heart of the Nazi death machine. Moving silently between work details, he identified fellow soldiers, priests, scouts, intellectuals, and ordinary prisoners whose spirits remained uncrushed. One by one, he drew them into the clandestine network that would become the ZOW, Związek Organizacji Wojskowej, the secret military organization. Its members operated like a human nervous system beneath the surface of the camp, passing news across barracks, monitoring the actions of capos, preparing hiding places, sharing stolen medicine, and creating codes that allowed information to move without ever appearing on paper. Pilecki's genius was not simply in recruiting, it was in understanding that even in a place designed to erase humanity, the human spirit could still organize, resist, and endure. He used every scrap of hope, every spark of defiance, to keep morale alive among prisoners who had long forgotten what survival even meant. By cleverly positioning resistance members in the kitchens, warehouses, and medical units, he secured access to food, clothing, and supplies that could keep the weakest alive, because every life saved was another voice, another witness, another soldier. Yet Pilecki's mission was not just to fight, it was to reveal. Through the resistance network, he constructed one of the most detailed intelligence operations of the entire war. While prisoners marched under guard, they counted transports, noted the arrival of SS doctors, tracked the construction of new crematoria, and documented the introduction of Zyklon B, all while disguising their observation behind blank expressions of exhaustion. The reports Pilecki sent out were unlike anything Allied command had seen. He described systematic murder long before the world was ready to believe it. He detailed starvation diets, lethal punishments, epidemics deliberately left untreated, and experiments carried out under the veneer of medical science. More explosively, he documented the shift of Auschwitz from a political prison into a death camp intended for industrial-scale extermination. By 1941, Pilecki's intelligence was flowing regularly out of Auschwitz, carried by brave civilians and resistance couriers who risked execution to deliver his messages to Warsaw, and from there to London. The Allies now had undeniable proof of the Holocaust at its birth. But tragically, as Pilecki would discover, information did not guarantee action. Inside the camp, hope flickered between these smuggled messages and the unthinkable reality around him, and still, through starvation, beatings, executions, and the constant presence of death, Pilecki pushed forward. He had walked into Auschwitz to expose its crimes, but his mission was far from over. By late 1942, Pilecki's intelligence network inside Auschwitz had grown so sophisticated, so widespread, and so effective that it touched nearly every corner of the camp's daily operations. The Zau had become a silent army living beneath the boots of the SS, watching, recording, and resisting with a discipline that would have impressed any formal military unit. But with growth came danger. The SS, frustrated by unexplained leaks, strange patterns in work assignments, and the remarkable survival of certain prisoners, began to suspect an organized movement. They increased random inspections, intensified interrogations, and transferred capos they believed too sympathetic to political prisoners. The camp transformed into a suffocating atmosphere of paranoia. And then, one night, during an unexpected sweep, the SS found something that would ripple through the camp like a knife. A prisoner carrying fragments of information, small notes, coded scraps that hinted at communication beyond the fences. The prisoner was executed within hours, but the discovery triggered a furious campaign to uncover the source. The SS did not yet know Pilecki's name, but they sensed a phantom in the barracks, someone with military precision and an uncanny ability to elude their surveillance. They intensified punishments, staged public executions, and randomly selected prisoners for torture, trying to scare whispers out of the shadows. Every scream from the blocks reminded Pilecki of the razor's edge his network walked. One mistake, one slip, one man breaking under agony could collapse the entire operation. Pilecki responded with cold, strategic discipline. He narrowed communication lines, compartmentalized the network into tighter cells, and enforced strict information control. No one knew more than they absolutely needed to. He personally destroyed caches of notes and maps he had been collecting for nearly a year, replacing them with memorized knowledge to prevent discovery. Even under threat, he continued documenting the construction of Birkenau's extermination facilities and the rapid rise in transport arrivals, especially of Jewish prisoners who were now being murdered in industrial numbers. His messages to the outside world grew more urgent. He pleaded for the Allies to bomb the railway lines, to strike the crematoria, to drop weapons so that an uprising could erupt from within. But in London, his warnings were drowned by skepticism, strategic priorities, and disbelief. The scale of the atrocities felt too immense to be real. Inside Auschwitz, Pilecki faced a different reality. The SS were closing in. Night after night, the Germans dragged men from the barracks, demanding names. Beatings turned into interrogations. Interrogations turned into murders, staged as attempted escapes. And yet, incredibly, the network held no one betrayed him. Even under torture, prisoners shielded the man orchestrating the operation. But Pilecki knew that survival by luck could not last forever. One crack in the system could bring everything crashing down. He had walked into Auschwitz to expose it. But now, with the SS tightening their fist and his mission entering its most dangerous phase, he began to consider a possibility he had never allowed himself to think about before: escaping. By early 1943, Witold Pilecki had gathered more intelligence on Auschwitz than any Allied spy in the field. He had mapped the barracks, monitored the crematoria, documented transports, charted extermination procedures, and built a resistance network of nearly 1,000 prisoners. But with the SS tightening their noose and the ZOW constantly at risk of discovery, Pilecki faced a brutal truth. He had done everything he could inside Auschwitz. Now he needed to do something he had once considered unthinkable: escape, survive, and deliver his reports in person to those who still doubted his warnings. But escaping Auschwitz was not an act of bravery. It was a brush with certain death. Guards patrolled every inch of the perimeter. Watchtowers cast overlapping cones of light. Electric fences killed instantly, and beyond the outer walls stretched miles of open terrain patrolled by SS units and German police. Only a handful had ever attempted escape. Nearly all had been caught and executed, their bodies displayed as examples. Pilecki understood this. He also understood that remaining meant the eventual destruction of his network and the silencing of the testimony he had spent years gathering. The mission, he decided, was now worth more than his life. All that remained was finding the one window of opportunity the SS would never expect. That moment came in April 1943, when Pilecki managed to secure a work assignment in the camp's bakery outside the main perimeter. A crucial detail, because the bakery had a side door that opened into a lightly guarded courtyard near the camp's edge. With two trusted prisoners, Jan Redze and Edward Chisielski, Pilecki planned a nighttime escape during the guard rotation when the bakery team was briefly unsupervised. On the chosen night, the trio slipped out through the side door and sprinted through the darkness, keeping low to avoid the watchtower lights. Every step felt like a step onto a landmine. Behind them, the hum of electrified fences crackled through the air. Ahead of them lay a wide field covered only by thin fog. They ran until their legs burned, diving into a drainage ditch just as a patrol passed by, its dogs barking in the direction of the bakery. For hours, they crawled through mud, keeping their faces pressed to the earth whenever lights swept near them. When they finally reached the tree line miles from the camp, exhaustion nearly swallowed them. But they kept moving, sleeping only in short bursts during daylight hours. For 2 weeks, the trio traveled through occupied territory, dodging patrols, begging for help from villagers, and relying on forged documents smuggled out by the resistance against every conceivable odd. They made it. Witold Pilecki escaped Auschwitz, the camp no one escaped from, and lived to tell what he had seen. And when he reached the Polish resistance headquarters, carrying the weight of 1,000 deaths in his memory, he delivered a plea to the Allies that should have changed the course of the war. When Pilecki finally reached the Polish Home Army headquarters after his miraculous escape, he carried with him something more powerful than any weapon he had ever held. The truth, he wrote for days, reconstructing every atrocity, every figure, every systematic murder he had witnessed inside Auschwitz. His reports were unlike anything Allied intelligence had seen. They were clear, detailed, measured, and horrifying. He explained how starvation was engineered as a tool of extermination, how the crematoria grew to match the scale of incoming transports, how the SS perfected the use of Zyklon B on masses of Jews, Poles, and prisoners from across Europe. He listed approximate daily death tolls. He described the machinery of genocide with the precision of a trained officer and the anguish of a man who had tasted its terror. These writings, later known as the Witold Reports, were smuggled to London through underground channels and placed before Allied intelligence and government officials. For the first time, Western leaders had a first-hand account from someone who had lived inside Auschwitz for nearly 3 years. Pilecki expected outrage, military action, bombings of railway lines, anything that might disrupt the slaughter. Instead, he encountered disbelief, bureaucratic hesitation, and strategic priorities that overshadowed the destruction of human life. Part of the tragedy was timing. The Allies were planning major offensives, and resources were stretched across multiple fronts. But another part was far darker. the scale of Pilecki's testimony simply felt impossible to Western leaders. They could not fathom that a modern industrial nation had built an entire economy of murder. Some thought his numbers exaggerated, others questioned the feasibility of bombing the camp or striking railway lines. In London, Pilecki watched diplomacy smother urgency. His warnings, which should have shaken the world awake, disappeared into the drainage system of war planning. What devastated him most was not that they ignored the details, it was that they ignored the people still alive inside the camp. Every day the Allies hesitated meant thousands more condemned to smoke. Pilecki pleaded again, requesting weapons for the Polish resistance so they could attempt a ground assault, or at the very least support for a mass escape. His pleas went unanswered. For the remainder of the war, Pilecki continued fighting, this time not as a spy, but as an officer in the Warsaw Uprising, determined to strike the Germans wherever he could. Yet the shadow of Auschwitz remained with him. He had carried the truth across enemy lines, survived hell to deliver it, and still the world had turned away. The reports were read, documented, archived, but not acted upon. And for Pilecki, that failure was a wound deeper than any inflicted by the SS. When the war dragged to its bitter end and the ashes of Auschwitz settled into the soil of Poland, Pilecki hoped, perhaps naively, that the world would finally understand the truth he had risked everything to deliver. He believed that once the Allies saw the camps with their own eyes, they would recognize the value of the man who had given them the earliest warning. But history, cruel as ever, had other plans. Poland fell under Soviet control, and the nation Pilecki had fought to defend was swallowed by a new totalitarian regime. To the communist government, Pilecki, a loyal officer of the Polish Home Army, a man connected to the underground and fiercely opposed to Soviet occupation, was not a hero, but a threat. He continued working to expose oppression, this time gathering intelligence on Stalinist operations in Warsaw, just as he had once done on the Nazis. But there was no escape route this time, no underground pipeline to deliver reports to sympathetic ears. In 1947, the communist secret police arrested him, subjected him to months of brutal interrogation, and staged a show trial designed to erase everything he had accomplished. He was accused of espionage, sabotage, and treason, charges as absurd as they were deliberate. When offered a chance to confess in exchange for mercy, he refused. He had survived the Nazis. He would not bow to their successors. On May 25, 1948, Witold Pilecki was executed with a single shot to the back of the head, buried in an unmarked grave, his body hidden, his legacy suppressed for decades. His wife and children were forbidden from speaking his name. His wartime reports were locked away behind walls of censorship. To the world outside the Iron Curtain, he simply disappeared, another casualty swallowed by the geopolitics of the Cold War. But heroes do not stay buried forever. When the Soviet Union collapsed and Poland regained its freedom, historians uncovered his writings, his intelligence operations, his escape, and the staggering bravery that had defined his life. Pilecki emerged not only as one of the greatest spies of World War II, but as one of humanity's purest examples of moral courage, a man who walked into Auschwitz voluntarily, who fought genocide from within, who escaped to warn the world, and who continued resisting tyranny until the moment of his death. Today, his name stands among the greatest heroes of the war, though too few still know his story. As more of his reports are translated, as the truth spreads across documentaries and archives, the world is finally beginning to understand who Witold Pilecki truly was, not just a soldier, not just a spy, but a man who carried the weight of humanity's darkest hour and refused to let it break him.